shaky commodity markets and a USDA report that is bringing higher yields for soybeans in the United States. Right here is Jerry Gidel to comment on Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. So Jerry, we are back here after our trip in central Illinois that we saw a growing corn crop in there with some good yields in several farms. But the USDA is telling us that basically we will have higher ending stocks for corn and soybeans.
Well, they're higher on a year-over-year basis on beans for sure. Corn's a little bit different. They actually took it down about 190 million or so from what they were projected last month, and actually the old crop scenario did go up about 20 million. But the craziness in this thing is right now is that when we did get the numbers today, they slammed beans and corn or beans and wheat, and then before the day was out, beans were back higher and wheat was near unchanged. So I think they're still concerned about weather in the U.S. coming up in front of us, and maybe just still a little bit of cautionary note about what's going on in the Black Sea, if that's going to continue or not, to provide some type of supplies to the world.
Yes, and there are some spots to watch like Nebraska and Kansas.
Oh, definitely. The Western Corn Belt still had some, they knocked down some of those yields pretty aggressively there. I think both of them were at least 15 bushels uh, down from last year. The Missouri wasn't as strong either. Iowa was kind of where it was at on corn last year, and that and Minnesota was up, and that. But the key question right now is that we've had another. It was cooled off here in the Eastern Corn Belt this week, but the Western Corn Belt, really particularly Mid Iowa West, contained stayed pretty warm, and it looks like they're finally going to back this ridge out of that area over the weekend, with a chance for some rain actually to occur in a kind of an interesting spot from Sioux Falls, Omaha, or excuse me, Sioux Falls and Sioux City down along eastern Nebraska and western Iowa into Missouri. That's an area that definitely needs some moisture, but that's the only area they're really projecting. So that's interesting. If we then go generally cool next week without a lot of rain, that's also kind of interesting. Can we get the soybean yields to stay up here after the USDA projected 51.9 today, which was kind of about 4 or 5, half a bushel higher versus a half a bushel lower. And so that was really the impetus for the setback here right after the report.
And how are you seeing the export projections?
Well, that's definitely a one to keep an eye on. There's no doubt. The U.S. Export projections uh, on corn, I think on old crop stayed in there. They did slip a little bit on new crop on that one. I think 50 million on that one. The twist of it is that it depends a lot on how this Ukrainian situation continues, so that food corridor continue at this point, and really function to get some more substantial supplies out of there. I think the backlog in Ukraine all along has been more corn than wheat, and at this point they've shipped a lot of the corn. Has been the primary thing they shipped out. They are going to finally get some wheat out of there in the coming few weeks here at this point, which interestingly enough, on a worldwide basis, is probably more important for food type direction because of the noodles and bread and all the different things you make out of wheat for food. is probably a little bit more directed towards human consumption than sometimes corn is. That you have to go through an animal to really get the best benefit out of corn. From that standpoint, the soybean side of things, it is always some vulnerability to that because what's going to happen in South America for this coming fall? Lots of expectations of substantial expansion there in Brazil. Argentina has some optimism too from the USDA at 54 million for the coming year on metric tons, but that one's still up in the air here on, and even Brazil at this point. How quickly do we get this fall plantings going and that type of thing? And what happens here in the U.S. on the soybean yields as we go into the last couple weeks of August and on into early September? I think exports can be a little fluid this time of year depending on what size the crop is.
Yes, and how long do you think this market will continue to be so shaky?
Well, the volatility is, I would probably put the term volatility versus shaky, but they're both volatile, or there's some of prices are up and down and things like that. And it doesn't, it's until we get really into the U.S. Harvest, do we really get a good sense of what the crop is going to be? We've had quite a little bit of weather in this thing. And then one thing we got to remember that happened today that is probably providing some basic background support on the soybeans is the fact that I've been really concerned about the northern plains uh, area up there, that they were going to go ahead and plant some additional uh, acres up there after they had the survey go through back in mid-June. But I was wrong. They ended up taking 300,000 acres less plantings, and actually are going to have a substantial prevent planting level up in that part of the world versus going ahead and taking and putting beans in. We also had, if you remember, had a pretty significant correction, if you will, in the plantings up in that part of the world. We were down over 1,000,001 in North Dakota and 500,000 in Minnesota. And so those acres up there basically just got too late for the producers out there to feel comfortable about planting them versus betting on the come that they could get a sizable enough crop to make sure they could get in the bin. And that they have some logic in the fact that cold and freezing temperatures can come up and swing down into that part of the U.S. pretty early out there. Particularly, it happened to hit in mid-September. That really wouldn't be a good situation. They would have put the crop in, and it would have been a pretty poor quality situation to get that out, and they probably wouldn't have got much money out of it.
Now, in terms of the wheat world, how do you think this report impacted the wheat world?
Well, the wheat, kind of interesting. The spring wheat numbers we got today on the planting side of things, they came through about as expected. The durum crop, actually, they reduced that by 100,000 acres. That's the interesting thing. We had 100,000 less corn, 100,000 less durum wheat, and 300,000 less of soybeans. So that really well made up the 520,000 tons that weren't planted up in that part of the world. The overall numbers, we did see a little stronger spring wheat yield up there, but we also slipped a little bit in some of the variations of winter wheat. And so the overall number, though, on production turned out to be very similar. I think it was 2 million up from the previous month. Excuse me. The interesting twist becomes the world numbers. The world numbers this time of year particularly become quite important. We did see the USDA increase the Russian crop. They increased Australia's crop. They did decrease the European crop by a couple hundred, 2 million metric tons. And so overall the production went up, but the S&D carryover stock on wheat stayed very tight here at 269 million metric tons, and a lot of that is stuck in the world of China. So it sounds pretty big, but the available supplies out there in the world trade still a little bit on the tight side. The one thing is that the you uh, considering what's going on in Ukraine, they actually increased the U.S. exports by 30 million uh, today, and so that that helped the tighten up the U.S. stocks here on wheat, and so it's going to be watched very closely here as how the weather starts to as we get into September in the U.S. That's when we start to get some wheat planted in the southern plains, and if it can stays as dry as it looks like right now, that's still going to be difficult. And as you look at a worldwide basis, South America and Australia are the next kind of crops that people are going to keep an eye on. There, Australia is looking good moisture wise, but Argentina isn't. So both of those are going to have a big impact on wheat as we go through the fall and into early winter.
Yes, and in the case you still have not seen our video about our Central Illinois crop tour, just go to the video description and you'll find a link to watch this video. What else would you like to comment today, Jerry?
Well, I think the you're exactly right. The video is going to give us a little recap, and along with a little bit of what we did out in the fields out there, and that. And so that's it's an interesting trip. It's always one of those things that I feel is highly important for me, and I'm glad you were able to join with us this time around to get a feel as to how these crop tours kind of happen and how the basic mechanism for counting yields in cornfields. We don't really have a great way of counting soybean yields because it's too early to get good pod counts, and on top of it, trying to come up with a standardized one for all the different yields out there and row sizes is pretty tough. But in general, the one thing we both noticed as you were out there was that the number of pods on most of these fields were pretty modest. Actually, we just had one or maybe one and a half fields that had any uh, decent pods even available to look at. And so that really does suggest that the weather, as we go forward here in the next 3-4 weeks, is going to be important as to what the ultimate size of the U.S. soybean crop is going to be. But that's part of the interesting world. We're going to have some additional updates from various people next week. And then, of course, we have the Pro Farmer, very extensive tour that they've done for many, many years that goes across from Ohio up through Illinois, Indiana, and up into Minnesota. And they have another branch of it that goes from South Dakota, Nebraska, Western Iowa, and Minnesota. So we're going to get another good look at what's going on out there. And that will also help determine a little bit of where we're going to have prices go at the balance of the next, say, 2 or 3 months out here as we go forward.
All right, thank you very much. We'll track all of this.
Exactly. And as I said, thanks for coming out and joining us on the tour this last weekend.